Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to talk with you today about Read Naturally Encore II. We will be providing an overview, going through student steps in this session. First, what we will do is cover what fluency is. I suspect that you all know, but we're just going to define it to make sure we have the common understanding. We'll briefly talk about who typically uses this intervention. We'll cover what the strategy is. Actually, there's three strategies that we combine to make what we call the Read Naturally strategy. And we will talk about teacher responsibilities. Please do have that handout ready and to view. The last 15 minutes of the session is an activity that we're going to do where it is very, very helpful if you have that up. In fact, you need it to participate in that activity because we're going to walk through the steps as if you were a struggling reader. And so that handout, the last section of that handout is designed for the end activity for today. But before that, let's dig into the other content. Fluency, of course, is one of the 5 components to teaching reading. In Encore II, there is a lot of work on fluency. There's a lot of work on comprehension. In our phonics series, there's a lot of work on phonics. Vocabulary is covered in all of our series. When we talk about fluency, it's important that we think about what it is that we hear, what kinds of students we have who have this specific issue. So go ahead and picture in your mind right now a student you have or have had in the past who struggles with reading, and just listen to that student read. Kind of turn on that audio portion of your brain. Many of the words you're probably thinking of are now on your screen, right? Word by word, made lots of mistakes, it's choppy. The first word I always think of is pain. It is painful to read that way. It's painful even to just have to listen to it. And so I can imagine how painful it must be to read that way. Most of us know there's a problem with our students reading in as little as 10 or 15 seconds. And most of us, including myself, has a physical reaction to a disfluent reader, right? We know right away. We also know right away what fluent reading is. It's the ability to read the way that you speak. It's not race reading. It's not speed reading. It is reading with an appropriate amount of expression at a very high level of accuracy and at a pace that is typical for your talking. And so it's important to know that Encore II enforces all of those components of fluency. And the reason fluency is so important is because, as you well know, it is highly correlated to comprehension for a vast majority of our students. This is a study that was done on a group of special education students showing validity coefficients with various comprehension measures. A statistician would tell you a validity coefficient of 0.6 and higher means it's highly correlated. Okay, so all of these measures are highly correlated with how this group of students performed on a standardized comprehension test. If you look at the last row where it says oral reading fluency, you can see that that is the most highly correlated with how these students performed on their standardized comprehension test. And again, that's not the case for all students. Specifically, English language learners may have a vocabulary deficiency that makes this less true for them. But certainly for the vast majority of our students, mostly your mainstream students, your English, your Title I students, special education students are very often following in that group. I want to demonstrate why that is or how that is for you. So I want you to read the first 2 lines that you see on this screen. I can't hear you myself right now, but I want you to read it out loud, get a full impact of the activity. So I'd like you to read out loud the first line and the second line of the words you see on this screen. Every time your students work in Encore, they will read out loud. It is always oral reading, okay? So in your room by yourself when you're watching this, I'd like you to read line 1 and line 2 out loud. Please begin. Blue, red, orange, purple, white, black, green, blue, yellow, black, red. Easy, right? Okay, some of the first words you learned to read probably. Now what we want to do is don't read the word, okay? Instead, I want you to name the color that the word is written in. Okay, again, just line 1 and line 2. Do it out loud as accurately as you can. Naming the color. Please begin. Red, gray, purple, yellow, orange, white, purple, white, green, red, gray. Is it harder or easier? It's way harder. And it's kind of remarkable that it's harder because actually a 3-year-old would be better than all of us at this task because she would know her colors, but she can't read yet. You're so good at reading that you're telling your brain to stop doing it and you can't. It's why graffiti bothers people because we have no choice but to see what it says. If our eyes land on it, we know what it says. And so if it's something nasty, it's going to bother you, right? Dr. Samuels was a professor at the University of Minnesota back in the 1970s, and he put forth a theory called the automaticity theory. And it's just dealing with the fact that reading is multitasking. I know you know this. And if you think about how good you are at doing multiple things at once, it's certainly much easier if one of them is absolutely automatic. Okay. So our students need to be automatic with decoding and reading in order for their brain to be available for understanding. So the students who tend to use this intervention are students who are below the 50th percentile. Each district might have slightly different rules with how far below. Read Naturally says 10 or more words below the 50th percentile indicates a candidate for this program. And as you can see, the students get better from the fall to the winter to the spring, which is great. Even struggling readers get better. But because their peers get better, it's not enough to just get better throughout the school year. Take a look at the proficient readers coming in the fall of 3rd grade. The 75th percentile is about 104. Struggling is about 59. Look at the end of the year. Those struggling readers aren't even where their peers were at the start of the year. And this is just the middle of the bell curve. This is just 25 to 75th percentile. So getting better is not enough. They have to get better faster. It's one thing I'd like to mention, and that is that there is a natural cap to oral reading fluency because we read the way we speak. There's no reason to push students beyond about 150 to 200 words correct per minute. Adult proficient readers read 150 to 200 words correct per minute. When they are at that point, when they're reading grade level material for the first time, work on other things, right? Now here's a table that shows all the grade levels, 1st through 8th, and more percentiles. And I just always like to highlight this because if you take a look at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so middle school grades, spring of the year, 50th percentile, you can see how identical this range is. There's a natural cap because, again, it's a reading as you speak. So what do we do about it? Well, the Read Naturally strategy is a system that is designed to make our students better readers. The National Panel of Reading got together many years ago, and they came out with this profound statement that says that just setting aside independent reading time is not sufficient for catching struggling readers up. It's like, well, yeah, no, of course not. What do your struggling readers do during independent reading time? The face I always imagine is the one that causes human relations issues in the classroom or bothers his buddy. But that's not what most of them do. Most of them put their eyes in a book that their friend is reading to, and they just pretend to read. All illiterate adults hid their illiteracy in classrooms. Okay, it's probably kind of where they learned to do it. So not everybody reads during independent reading time, but you all are using your prep time today, probably, the one moment you have to yourself to watch this video, to learn about this program. So I'm guessing you're the kind of teachers who can get the student to actually read during independent reading time, right? You go to Target, you spend $100 on prizes and candy bars. You pick every single book for every single kid, and it's the topic they love at the level they love, and you get every kid to read. 10 minutes, a proficient reader reads about 2,000 words in his head. Because when a proficient reader reads silently, he'll easily read 200 words. So after 10 minutes, that's 2,000 words. A struggling reader maybe only reads 50 words in a minute. So after 10 minutes, she's only read 500 words. If we give them equal practice, it is nowhere near equal. In fact, this is a disparity of 7,500 words in just one school week, if this is the only time these two kids practiced, and we know the difference there. So Read Naturally is a system that combines teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring into one strategy. In teacher modeling, your students are going to read along with the audio CDs that come with the program. On the audio CDs, the stories and the keywords are recorded 3 times. Well, the keywords are recorded once, but the story is recorded 3 times. Each time it gets a little bit faster, but it is slow enough that the student can actively read along out loud with the audio. They have to see the words, say the words, hear the words, and those of them who are still using their fingers will even touch the words. If they do that all at the same time, they will learn words they didn't know. They will solidify those high frequency words that they have struggled with for years, because they will hear it, see it, say it, and touch it all at the same time, and it will start to solidify that word. The next strategy is repeated reading. It's just mastery learning. We do it all the time. In Encore, students read the same passage over and over and over and over again until they've mastered it, to the point in which they can still read words from that passage tomorrow in a different passage, right? We have to have them read it so many times that they master those words at a very high level, so that when they see them a different time, they still know them. The transferring is the key. And the way to get a kid to read the same thing over and over again is you time them. And now you're doing, it's a game. They want to see that they can get better. They want to beat their score. They want to get to the next level. I think of it as kind of the hook, right? You need kids to buy in, and progress monitoring is your buy-in. In as little as a minute, these kids learn from firsthand experience that through practice, they get better at reading. They can get better at something that they've struggled with for years, many of them. And it starts to change the way they view reading, and even the way they view themselves. And you know that if you've got that kid hooked, your job is half done. So these 3 strategies are what makes the Read Naturally strategy. The teacher responsibilities for this program include planning and setting up, placing students, implementing the steps, and monitoring performance. Okay, so planning and setting up and placing students happens before students begin working, and the other 2 are while they're working. Okay, when you are planning and setting up, the very first thing on your top of mind should be efficiency, meaning that your students need to be in the act of reading as much as possible. Every minute they're not reading is another 50, 100 words that they didn't practice. Okay, so always trying to increase time spent reading, increase words read. Ideally, if this is typically used, it was created by a special education Title I teacher in the Minneapolis public schools, and so she used it in a resource room. Later, now it's also on the computer, it was software, and now it's an online program as well. And so then maybe a computer lab, but any place that you have a teacher and about 6 students, okay, 6 or fewer. Many of the steps students work through in Encore are independent, but they do need the teacher at certain points, and you need to be able to come to them quickly. Again, the efficiency. If they're waiting for you because you're working with somebody else, that's time that they're not actively reading. We have waiting activities that they can utilize, but they're not as good as actively practicing reading. Okay. Ideally, this program is used at least 30 minutes a session. 30 to 45 is usually the range, 3 to 5 days a week. In Encore II, the materials you have are going to be black line masters that you run copies of for your students. There's also a glossary that comes with each level, and there are audio CDs that come with each level. You will have to provide your students with maybe a folder or some way to keep all that together. In the Blackline Masters, there are graphs for their graphing, how they do, so you can run copies for each of your student there too. Speaking of graphs, here's what the graph looks like in paper on the left side. The right side is how it looks in our online program. But very similar, students are coloring in how far they get on their first time reading a story and how well they do on the final time they read the story. So we're keeping track of errors, expression, rate. We're also keeping track of how they do on comprehension. They're ordered in the way to help you diagnose a problem. So if you take a look at this report, this particular student is doing well in every area. I'm not too worried yet. Maybe this detail section might concern me if it keeps to be a problem. But look at the encore graph. The encore graph is this one on top. The very bottom row is main idea. This student is missing main idea a lot. So I know there's a main idea issue. Okay, it helps you diagnose a comprehension problem. There are retells in the sequence series, word lists, and spelling activities in the phonics series. And again, the audio does come on an audio CD. The audio includes keywords for each story, 3 readings of the story at slightly different paces, and then all the words that are bolded in the stories, all the words that are in the glossary that come with your level are read and defined on the audio CDs as well. When you're preparing for your students, you're going to need to get those black line masters and run copies, right? After you place students, you're going to give them a folder that has all the, has half of the stories from the level they placed in. Read Naturally recommends you breaking up your stories into 2 groups of 12. There's 24 nonfiction stories in each of the levels. And so if you break them up into 2 groups of 12, we recommend you do the odd stories and the even stories. So a group of odd, so story 1, 3, 5, and a group of even, story 2, 4, 6, and so forth. The reason for that is if you take a look at the CD here on my screen, you'll notice that the story number that's on this CD is story number 7 and story number 8. So there is an odd and an even story on each CD. So if you give all the students all the odd stories, it means that all CDs can go be in circulation. Okay. Whereas if you give them the first 12, well, that's only the first 6 CDs that are in circulation. So that's the reasoning for the odd and even. But they can pick any story they want. They're not ordered in any way. They don't have to pass all the stories in the level. They'll pass when they're making enough progress to move up. They'll need a pencil. And ideally, they would need a blue and red crayon or colored pencil for the graph. And then a reading guide if they like that. We have these materials, but you can also purchase them elsewhere. But most importantly, they're going to need a CD player and headphones, and they're going to need a timer. We create our own timers, but all that you need is a digital timer that does not count down the seconds. So it can be set for 1 minute. It doesn't change until the buzzer sounds at the end of the minute, because if it changes, your kids are going to be checking those timers to see how many seconds they have left, right? So it's best if it's a digital timer that doesn't count down the seconds. And each kid needs his own. If you have 6 kids working at a time that rotate through your room every hour, then you need 6 sets, because each kid needs their own timer and their own CD player and headphones. Here are the different curricular options that are available within Encore II. You may have all these at your site. You may not have all these at your site. We sell it by the level. So some schools buy everything in the sequence series. Some buy everything in both. Just depends. Okay, so here you can see the various options that are available to you. It goes from 1st through 8th grade reading level. The phonics series goes from 1st through very early 3rd grade reading level. You can see this table over in the bottom lower right tells you which phonics skills are taught at each level. The sequence series has keywords with definitions at the front, the top, that's the first step. The last step is a written retell or summary. The phonics series has no definitions with their keywords, as you can see, but the audio CD has a phonics lesson, and then they practice decoding words of the pattern that the story is dedicated to. The story has many long A silent E words. This story does. Okay, so they are work at reading in connected text. And then instead of a summary at the end, the phonics series has a word list, so they practice reading words of a word family, and then they practice spelling words in that word family. So they do decoding and then encoding. And then the idiom series, the keywords are idioms. So they're phrases, and it's in a 3.0 to a 4.5. When we talk about placement, we have a placement process, a placement packet. If you purchase the materials, you will get a booklet that is called the placement packet. We also have a downloadable version of the placement packet online, so you can get it anywhere. But all you do for placement is estimate the student's reading level. You find the passage in our placement packet that aligns with your estimate. So let's say you have a 5th grader who you think is reading a year below grade level. Okay, you're going to give him the 4.0 passage because he's a 5th grader. You think he's a year below grade level. You're going to have him read that passage for a minute. You'll count his errors, subtract them from the words attempted, and you get a words correct per minute score, which you plug into this table. If he fits, it's a good level. If not, you keep going until you find where he fits. That information is written down in the placement packet for you. Okay, we have in the back of the placement packet, right in the appendix, I think it would technically be something like page 67 or something. It's right after the appendix. There's a record sheet for you to keep track of how your students do. On the right side is the record sheet for you to write on for each student, and on the left side are the step-by-step instructions of how to do it. So that one sheet of paper, you can run copies for each student you're going to place. You have a cheat sheet of what the steps are to do the process, and then you have all the information you need to make the decision. And then you just have to give the student the passage at the levels until you find a good fit. Then you set a goal based on the age of the student. You either add 30 or 40. Okay, and again, all of this is in that placement packet, instructions. On our website, we have videos about placing students. So there's a lot of different options. In the chat box, we have a link to that placement packet as well. And that video, there's a video for it. But the placement packet, it contains the content to use in placement, the instructions for you, and a worksheet for you to utilize to record how students do. All right, we're going to talk about implementing the steps. Now, we're going to go through this a couple different ways. The first way we're going to go through it is I'm going to show you a short video. And I want you to see this video because for some of us, including myself, I learn a lot better if I can see something in action. And so this is a 5-minute video showing you an actual classroom where students are working in the program. And you'll get to see how it's set up. You'll get to see when students are independent and when the teacher is needed. Okay. After that, we are going to walk through the steps as if you are a struggling reader. Okay. So let me pop out of the PowerPoint for a moment and head over to this video. Make sure I am sharing my computer sound so you can all hear it. And we will watch this short video of Read Naturally Encore being used in a classroom.
Let's go through the steps of the Read Naturally Encore program. This is Javon. Her teacher taught her how to complete the steps in Encore. Let's watch her work through a story. As you watch, notice that Javon can now work through most of the steps independently. She begins by choosing a story to work on from the set provided by her teacher. Giving students a choice of stories helps put them in control of their own learning. After selecting a story, Javon listens to the key words and their definitions or reads along with the narrator. This step helps students learn several challenging words from the story. Based on the story title, picture, and key words, she predicts what the story will be about. Next, Javon times herself for 1 minute as she reads the story aloud, but quietly for the first time. This first timing is called the cold timing. During the cold timing, Javon underlines any word she has difficulty reading. Her teacher has told her to underline words that she stops on, stumbles on, or wants to skip. After the cold timing, Javon counts how many words she attempted. Then she subtracts her errors to calculate the number of words she read correctly. Students who are new to the program need the teacher present during the cold timing until they can accurately identify their own errors. Javon graphs her cold timing score in blue on a fluency graph. Next, she reads the entire story along with a recording several times. In this step, Javon doesn't just passively listen to the story. Instead, she actively reads out loud quietly. Reading aloud helps make sure that Javon's actually reading with the narrator, who correctly pronounces the words. Students typically read along with the narrator 3 times. A few students may need to read along more than 3 times. Older students and students reading close to grade level may only need to read along once or twice. Once Javon has completed the read-along, she practices reading the story aloud quietly, without the narrator. She will practice anywhere from 3 to 10 times.
Have you ever wondered how people get ideas?
During these practices, she reads as far as she can in 1 minute and then calculates her score as she did during the cold timing. Javon continues practicing until she reaches the individualized goal rate that her teacher set. Once Javon can read the story at the goal rate, she turns up her red card to signal that she's ready to pass and needs help from an adult. While waiting for an adult, Javon answers some questions about the story. The comprehension questions are an important way of reminding students that they're reading for meaning, not just rate. If she finishes the questions before an adult is available, Javon continues practicing the story, trying to improve her score. She knows that if she isn't working, an adult won't come over to time her.
All right, are you ready to pass?
As soon as she's available, the adult conducts a 1-minute hot timing to see if Javon can pass the story.
Whenever you start reading, I'll start the timer.
Have you ever wondered how people get ideas to make new ones on the one side and loops on the other?
If Javon reaches her goal in the hot timing, makes 3 or fewer errors, reads with proper expression, and answers all the questions correctly, she passes the story. Javon graphs her hot timing score in red on the fluency graph, giving visual proof of her progress on the story. Finally, Javon sets the timer for 5 minutes and retells or summarizes the story. This step provides an opportunity to develop summarizing skills and reminds students that they are reading for understanding. An adult checks the retelling and counts the number of words written, excluding parts that were directly copied or that didn't reflect the story. Some teachers give bonus points for proper capitalization and punctuation. Javon graphs the number of words she wrote in 5 minutes, which enables her teacher to track her progress. Knowing that the retell is being measured motivates students to remember more of what they've read.
You have totally finished Velcro. Excellent job.
Now that Javon's completed all the steps, she starts again by selecting a new story to work on. Students work at their own pace, and it's quite possible that Javon won't complete all these steps in a single session. Instead, she makes note of what step she's on at the end of a session, and on the next day, she'll start working where she left off. Refer to the teacher's manual for more details about each step and lesson plans for teaching the steps to your students.
Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to you to get to see what it looks like in action in that working through a story video. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through that interactive activity I told you about. I've been doing trainings for Read Naturally for almost 2 decades, or maybe even a little more than 2 decades. And everyone enjoys this activity as their most favorite part. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the first 7 steps of this of the step poster, as you can see on your screen. I want you to know what it feels like to be a struggling reader. I want you to have a little insight into that. And I want you to feel the power of the strategy. So I want you to turn in your handout till you find a page that looks like this. Okay. When you have this backside, you can see that you'll have the story on one side. The backside is questions and retell. We're not going to work on the backside. Don't worry, you're not going to have to complete the quiz, but you are going to work on the graph, okay? Because you are going to graph how far you do on the cold timing and how far you do on the hot timing. Now, if you only have this handout in electronic form and you haven't printed it, that's fine. You can just flip to the graph and kind of indicate with your finger on that. You don't absolutely have to have it printed off. But I am going to walk us through the steps, and I want you to have this part of your handout up so that you can read off of it. Okay. And if you think about what's up with this story, well, all of the vowels are missing. Okay. This is very, very important that you know that all Read Naturally stories have vowels. We would never give a struggling reader a story without vowels. But in order to make you a struggling reader, we had to take a regular story and take out the vowels. Okay. So this is not how a story would look in Read Naturally Encore, I promise. But it is how it looks for you because I want you to be struggling. And the only way to do that is to take the vowels out of this so it's harder for you to read. Okay, so you have this story up from your handout, and we're going to walk through the first 7 steps. The first step is select a story. Your students can pick any of the nonfiction stories in their level. Remember, I recommended you break them into 2 groups of 12. All the odd stories and then all the even stories, but they're not ordered in any way. Giving them 12 helps with the selection process being a little shorter. And it also helps with the circulation of the audio CDs. So I selected the story for you. The title of your story is Killer Bees Without Vowels. Okay, so that's the story you're going to read as we go through this process. The first step after there, the next step rather, is the keyword step. So the student reads the keywords with their definitions along with the audio support. I am going to be your audio support. And I ask that you read out loud. You have already dedicated a significant amount of your precious time to this step webinar and get the most out of it. This really, to experience it yourself is a really powerful thing to help you understand and to help you internalize what is needed in this program for it to be effective. Okay, so what I ask that you do is during the keywords and the read along step that you read along out loud. Even though I can't hear you, you will get more out of it if you do it that way. So I will read slow enough so that you can read along out loud with my voice. Here we go. Gentle. Gentle means mild or not likely to cause harm. Mean. When an animal is mean, it is easily upset and does not act in a nice way. Swarm. A swarm is a big group of insects, often bees, moving together. Chase. Chase means to follow something in order to catch it. All right. Great. Now, write a quick prediction. If you have the story from your handout printed out, then go ahead and write the prediction right on the lines on that story where there's a space that says write a prediction. And then there's a couple lines. Go ahead and jot it down there. If your handout is only in electronic format, go ahead and just take a piece of scratch paper on your desk and jot down a quick prediction about what you think the story is going to be about. I suggest having your students set a 1 or 2 minute timer for this so that they don't spend a lot of time on it. It is a strategy for comprehending what they read. It is not meant to be a big writing activity. Remember, the most important thing of this program is to think of like an efficiency expert, to get kids in the act of reading as much as possible. That's how they're going to catch up. They have to be reading. So you want them to understand predicting is a great comprehension strategy. We want them to do it, but we also want them to do it with enough speed that they spend most of their time reading rather than writing. Okay. The next step is the cold timing. So I am going to time you. It's a little tricky because I can't hear any of you. But when I say, I'm going to say, when I hear your voices, I start my timer, because that is how I time kids. As just like you, I'm sure I don't say ready, set, go. But I say, when I hear your voice, I'll start my timer. And so the next time I say that, please begin reading out loud, because right after I say that, I will start the timer. And while you're reading, I want you to have a pencil in your hand. And when you come to a word you don't know, I want you to underline that word and keep reading. Okay. And again, if you're is an electronic form of the story, just make a little check mark on a piece of paper every time you come to a word you don't know. All right. So when you come to a word you don't know, underline it or make a check mark to indicate an error. You know that you don't know that a word is hard for you, or that you have an unknown word, because you stop, stumble, or skip it. If you stop in front of it, if you stumble on it, or if you have to skip it, you do not know that word. I need you to underline or make a check mark to indicate that you stopped, stumbled, or skipped. I want you to notice how much you don't want to underline things, just like your kids. They're not bad, they're not cheaters. They're just going to give themselves the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so if you're not with them for a cold timing, for some reason, know that that data point can't totally be accurate. Okay. All right, so have your pencil handy, have your story up, and I've got my timer ready. So I will start my timer. Here we go. When I hear your voices, I will start my timer. All right, stop. Draw a line after the last word you think you read correctly and count over to the margin where you see the number written. Okay, that's how many words have been written up to that point. So you're going to continue counting from that point over to where you drew your line. That's the number of words attempted. Go ahead and write that down at the bottom of the page. And again, if your story is only an electronic copy, just do it on a piece of scratch paper. Write down the number of words you attempted, and then go back and count how many words you are willing to underline or how many check marks you are willing to make to indicate errors. Subtract that number from the number of words attempted, and that gives you your cold timing score. Then flip to your graph and draw a line as to how far you got on your cold timing score. Put on the graph so you know where you're at right now. Okay, we're going to go through the next few steps of the program, and you're going to see if you can get any better. Okay. Your students know what their goal is when they get to this graph step, but I didn't tell you your goal. But I did tell you that adult proficient readers read somewhere between 150 and 200 words when they're reading out loud, right? We read the way we speak. So your goal is 150. I suspect none of you got there. And that's good. If your students are meeting their goal on their cold timing, something's wrong. They're not in the right spot. Okay. You want them to have to work hard to get to that goal. So the first thing they're going to do is read along with the audio support on the audio CD. I'm going to be your CD. We're only going to read along twice, and we're only going to read the first paragraph because I want to demonstrate something for you. But your students will read the entire story, likely all 3 times. Older students only need to read along once or twice. Okay. So we're going to read along 1 time and just to the first paragraph. All right. I'm going to be the narrator. Read along with me as best you can. Notice how glad you are to have me. It feels good to have somebody, because it's hard. So it feels good to have somebody reading with you. Also notice how glad you are I'm going slowly. so that you can hear, see, and say at the same time. And finally, notice how many words you don't, or how much you don't want to underline things. Okay, that is human nature. So here we go. Begin right where you did for the cold timing. Bees are very important. They make honey and help crops to grow. There are many kinds of bees. One kind is gentle, but it does not work hard. Another kind of bee is very mean, but it is a hard worker. This bee makes much more honey than the gentle bee. One man thought that mating these two bees would be a good idea. He thought crossing the two kinds of bees would make a gentle, hard-working bee. That was a big mistake. All right, so there are words in there you thought you knew that you didn't know, and it's okay. Your attention was drawn to them. So even if they on the cold timing, they don't have you for some reason and they read it incorrectly, when they get to the read along, they're going to notice they had it wrong and their awareness will be heightened to that word. Okay. Now I'm going to read along one more time. We're just going to read that first paragraph in the story again. I want you to notice that we go a little bit faster, just like the audio CD will. Each time it gets a little bit faster. And I want you to start adding some expression. Okay, this is going to be the third time you've read this little paragraph. You should be able to start adding some expression. So here we go. Read along again out loud. Always reading out loud. Read along out loud with me as best you can. Bees are very important. They make honey and help crops to grow. There are many kinds of bees. One kind is gentle, but it does not work hard. Another kind of bee is very mean, but it is a hard worker. This bee makes much more honey than the gentle bee. One man thought that mating these two bees would be a good idea. He thought crossing the two kinds of bees would make a gentle, hard-working bee. That was a big mistake. All right. Now we're going to do the final step that you and I are going to do together, okay? We're going to do the practice step. Your students will practice 3, 4, 5, 6 times. They're going to practice until they meet their story goal before they can go on to the quiz. For this demonstration, you and I'm just going to have you practice one time because we want to see if you got better. But it's important to know your students will practice several times. When you're practicing, I want you to take note of what happens to you when we get to the second paragraph where we didn't practice together. Okay, we did the read along for that first paragraph. We didn't for the rest of the story. So I want you to take note of what happens when you get to that section. So I'm going to time you again, just like I did the last time. And I want you to begin reading, and I will start my timer and just read as best you can, again, out loud. So here we go. When I hear your voices, I will start my timer. Starting. All right. So, did you get better? Bet you did. Bet you got a lot further than you did the first time. What happened? Think about what happened to you when you got to the part that we didn't practice together. I suspect you slowed down. I suspect you lost your confidence. So you can see how important teacher modeling is. You can see how imperative that read along is, that they learned words in there and they were better readers because of it. But when you read that second paragraph that we didn't practice together, what happened to you then? You lost your confidence. You slowed down. But think about, was it easier or harder? Was reading the first paragraph, the very first time you saw this passages without the vowels, was that harder or easier than when you got to that second paragraph that we didn't practice together? I've been doing this for many years, and I can tell you that everyone always says it was easier. Yeah, it's easier. Why is it easier? It's easier because you learned some words in that first paragraph through the teacher modeling. And so when you saw them in the second paragraph, you still knew them. So it transfers to new text. Okay. So you can see how important teacher modeling is. You can see the fact that it transfers to new text. Now, typically your students would keep practicing until they meet that story goal. Of yours will be 150. So you'd have to keep going until you meet that story goal. And usually we also mandate at least 3 practices. Then they answer those quiz questions. To pass, here are the requirements for passing. Your students have to meet that story goal of words correct per minute. That's number 1. Number 2, they have to be accurate. 3 or fewer errors on that final timing. Number 3, they have to have some expression. Okay, we have a scale of 1 to 4, 2 and higher passes them. And finally, they need their quiz questions answered right. And if you want them to do a written retell, they need to have that done well. And then they've passed the story. Okay, so they can graph their final timing. They record how many errors they had, what their expression rating was. They record their comprehension scores in the upper right-hand corner. They do their retell or their word list, and they're all done. Okay. So you will need to monitor performance. You use your data for that. We are going to have a webinar that is just on checking initial placement in Encore II. That's going to come in a little while. Check our website for it. We also have a webinar that's coming a month or so after that that is keeping students challenged in Encore II. So we have 2 upcoming webinars that deal with data. For now, it's the start of the school year. Take hold of that fidelity checklist that's in your handout and try to get yourself set up. Okay, reach out to us. We're here to help. So please call us, email us with your questions. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.